Today's crisis of standards, technology, and Noah's story. Today we face, overtly, a crisis of standards. We have people who complain about the standards that are imposed, apparently illicitly, and those who uphold standards. And then the question becomes, in the name of what do they uphold the standards? Those who question the standards say that the standards are biased, that the standards are not universal, that the standards should be fair to everyone. So they appeal to equity. Those who try to defend the standards are saying that those standards are more and more equitable, that they're more and more fair. And how can they assess the fairness of the standards? Well, by saying that it is computers, machines, that are defining the standard. It is not the human biased element that enters into the assessment of human beings, of our faculties. It is a machine. Now, the machine, of course, is a carrier of inputs given by people. So we have technicians, psychologists, all sorts of specialized knowledge that comes into play in forging software, essentially. So mechanisms that are to serve as the basis for the determination of whether we are good or bad, right or wrong, fit or unfit for this or that enterprise, this or that trade or business. So it is, for instance, that we have cognitive assessment machines that will tell us whether we are fit to be a doctor, to be a mechanic, to be whatever discipline we wish to turn into a career. And so we have the situation where the standards are mechanically defined, and those who object to standards are falling right into this mechanization of standards by inveighing against the human element. Old standards are bad because they're all too human. They're biased. They are assessed, they're determined perhaps, recognized by an elite that is choosing its own standards. Now, of course, this is not really questioned by the defenders of standards today. They admit that old standards were historically generated, that they were reflections of old biases, and the solution to that is the machine, of course. So the solution that is proposed and advocated. So it is, for instance, in the case of the most, the loudest of debates in the stratosphere of mass media discourse. Today we have these debates over what qualifies as, for example, a man or a woman. And so how do we assess whether somebody is a woman? Well, we look at the data. In fact, we are raised to assume that everything, all knowledge, is at its core So it breaks down into data. So we live in an information age, and so everything breaks down into these bits of information, which we call data. And the human being, well, the human being himself is reducible to this data. So if we are to define, say, a woman, we have to go to the data that allows us to determine whether someone is a woman or not. And it turns out that this data is managed and interpreted, finally defined, by technicians, of course, and most prominently, biologists. So biologists are supposed to tell us whether someone is a man or a woman. And of course, we have the data on the level of chromosomes and so forth. But of course, if I meet someone, I don't have access readily anyway, to his or hers chromosomic structure. And that's, in practical terms, absolutely irrelevant. Somebody could say, well, this person has a X, Y, and Z as chromosomes. And yet, on a practical level of exchange, it doesn't make any difference to me. Whatever the machine says, if there is no level of common sense that serves as a basis for the determination for the identification of someone, right? The machine can say whatever it wants, or whatever somebody told it to say. I'm still meeting someone who doesn't look like a woman, doesn't behave like a woman. It's as if someone were to tell me that that person is not a human being, he's a monkey, because the machine says so. Well, but I encounter that person, I speak to that person, and I say, no, he's not a monkey. So the specialized knowledge can be such that, well, if it is cut off from common sense, it's useless. It's absolutely useless. In fact, it can be a great distraction. It can distract us from a direct experience of things. But now, common sense is a problem. Common sense is sensus communis, which is to say the imagination. But the imagination today has been shaped by technology. And so we tend to envision things through the mediation of machines, in a mechanical way as well. Our memory is saturated with machine-mediated and constituted imagery and sounds. The pace, the rhythm of our lives is defined by the machine, the watch, the phone. So, appealing to common sense is, as much as it remains important, of course, is a big problem, because our imagination, our common sense, the sense that we share all in common, has been formatted to a great extent, has been shaped, informed, distorted by machines. That's a big problem. As long as we don't find a space to flush all of this noise that we receive, all of these data out of our minds, inevitably we tend to see and react to what we see in a mechanical way, and our lives, our experience of things is going to be mediated by machines. So, on what grounds do we assess whether someone is a man or a woman? This becomes complicated, of course, today. There's so much confusion that is brought up by the advocates of no standards. They say, no, there are no fixed standards. In fact, what they mean is that all standards are technical, and therefore the machine can modify the identity of people. This brings to mind Dr. Seuss story, the Sneetches with their stars on their bellies, and then there are other Sneetches without the stars on their belly. So the ones with a star prize themselves for having the star. Then comes in a machine, a merchant with a machine, and the machine promises to give you a star on your belly. So you're going to become a star belly Sneetch, if only you undergo treatment. Now, you change the names, and mutatis mutandis, you have men and women want to become men, and so you just go through the machine and pay, and go through the machine, and it'll turn you into a man. And now the men say, no, we were special. We want to distinguish ourselves from the women, so we were going to go through another machine that takes the star off. In other words, that turns us into women. So after a while, you can't distinguish men from women ultimately. And everybody's exhausted. Everybody loses all their money on the machine. The merchant with the machine disappears, goes away, because left everyone stranded, not knowing what the heck they were. If they were an original man or an original woman, it makes no difference anymore. And so in the story, so goes the story in Dr. Seuss. They all shake hands and they say, you know what the heck, it doesn't matter anymore. Now, of course, that is a bit of a problem here, because it does matter, in fact, whether one is a woman or a man. That is something that is not a question of determining, but of recognizing. We recognize these distinctions. The otherness of the man for the woman, the otherness of the woman for the man. These are aspects that are constitutive of human life. You could say one could be a hermit and forget about all of that. You could also say that in old age, the distinction between man and woman is almost lost, physically anyway. That is not altogether accurate, of course. When we sleep, we all look alike. Yeah, well, sure. But the question is whether we want to be awake or not. Whether the human being is at his best, that is to say, whether the human being is called to be awake or asleep, whether he's called to recognize himself as a woman, man, without limiting himself, of course, his identity to that, but understanding that human life is polarized. All right, well, this is an example of a situation where identity, in fact, standards to define identity, are mechanically produced, mechanically defined. And everyone seems to be agreeing on this. Those who defend the cognitive assessment tests, or whatever they want to call them, they will appeal to the objectivity of the test, of the standards. The implication is that what we are is, a bundle of feelings that are subjective. So the subjective element can be assessed and defined ultimately by the objective element, which is the machine. So this is where everyone enters into the technological society, or technocracy. So all of life is mediated by the machines. Everyone is defined ultimately by the machine. And what does the machine aim at, essentially? How is it programmed? Well, it is programmed to have everyone, of course, defined hierarchically with respect to the machine. So whoever is more like a machine wins, is higher up. Whoever is less like a machine is unfit. He has mental deficiencies, mental illness, and so forth. Now, he could be a complete mental wreck, or he could just be, well, eccentric with respect to the machine. For instance, if we were to ask a machine how it assessed our current discussion, well, the machine would have a bit of a problem because the discussion would not fit the parameters it is programmed to recognize as fit. So it might say, no, this is insanity. You can't question the machine, not on this level. Now, it could integrate it in terms of data, and so then, well, could repackage everything that we're saying, cutting it off from precisely any foundation that is not merely mechanical. Now, here's the difficulty we're facing today. Is there a non-mechanical foundation to our identity? And so are there non-mechanical standards? Now, the machine doesn't recognize it. If we say that those standards would be simply automatically subjective, that we need an objective mechanical solution to that issue, well, we'll play into technocracy, of course. And this is what the technocrats, including the psychologists and all these other technicians, are doing. They will occasionally appeal to hypotheses that can make us feel better, that can, in fact, support the enterprise of technocracy. These values or ideals that they can invoke to support their business are, God and, at least in earlier times, nature. Nature as something stable. But nobody believes in nature as something stable because technicians have already dismantled that idea. There's no stability in nature. Right? None that we can recognize and appeal to as a reasonable foundation for our values and our value judgments, as they call them. In other words, for determining whether something is right or wrong, better or worse, and so forth, in practical life. So that sort of nature, classical nature, is out of the window. No natural foundation. What about God? Well, God, once you get rid of that natural foundation, and so what earlier times called natural reason, as opposed to modern instrumental reason, mechanical reason, what is left of God? Well, God is a value. A value that is not a natural end to man, because, again, there's no natural end. So there is no natural inclination of man toward the divine, a divine transcendence. Instead, God is what we seek historically. Historically, in other words, because we are moved by certain necessities, certain compulsions. These compulsions are historically relative, contingent, and so they tend to drive us to seek comfort in the idea of a God. Right. Well, there's no natural tendency to God as the perfection of nature, of human nature. Then God can be dispensed with. It can be useful, though. We can recycle old gods and we can appeal to them to motivate us, to inspire us to abide by standards that are given, however, by the machine. So we can appeal to God to believe, to better believe, more efficiently believe in the doctrine of the Big Bang, for instance, that tells us that the universe is mechanically constituted. We could also believe in mechanical evolution. And so we believe that there's a God that set everything in motion, a deist God, perhaps, or something like that. In fact, simply, we don't even need to go that far. Simply an ideal that is an as if, right? In Kant's terms, we behave as if there were a God. This God wants us to be technocrats. Now, what happens when we're all in the machine, where our lives are all mediated by the computer, by the machine, by this mechanical way of life? For indeed, again, one could hardly stress this too much. Technology is not a mere tool. The tool is a manifestation of a logic, way of life. So, an order of things. So the toy, the technological toy, is not technology in its essence. All right, so what happens when we're all in it? Well, what is the logic of the machine? The logic of the machine is one of integration. It seeks to integrate the subjective in the objective. Well, the integration is not a question of simply obliterating. It is a question of restoring. So, for instance, our collective memory will be stored in the machine, AI, so-called artificial intelligence. So we won't need to remember things. It will do it for us. If we don't need to remember, we don't really need to recollect, which involves an effort to gather these memories that we have into something original. In other words, the root of the memories. Now, recollection is out, memory is out, and restored in the machine. Now, when our lives are completely integrated in the machine starts selling us dreams, we linger as dreamers, and then what? Well, the question goes back and cannot be understood unless we go back to the logic of the machine. What sort of motive do certain people have to set this logic up? And the logic of the machine pertains to the notion of an autonomy of reason. Human reason, and thus human freedom, is autonomous. It doesn't need to appeal to God other than by way of reassuring itself with its own fetish, its own pet ideal or value, which it can change. It chooses. It says that we all choose this God. How do we all choose it? How do we all agree upon it? Well, because we do so mechanically. So we're all under the machine, and we accept that this is the God that we need to keep going. Right. Well, at the bottom of this logic, of technology, we have this notion of autonomy. Now, there's a problem with this. Right? It's a problem that has been vindicated by many a writer, many a fellow who reflected on this problem of modernity. And the problem boils down to the inadequacies of autonomy. Freedom, human freedom, conceived autonomously as self-grounded, falls apart. As long as it strives for its own projections, its own toys, it's involved in this production, the production of homo faber, the man who the human being defined in terms of making. It's more or less okay. It can still hold on to the notion of infinite progress. However, at some point, it faces this difficulty. Once it's in the machine, it's no longer striving to create a machine that will host him, that will be its home Tower of Babel, or perhaps just a Mecca or a paradise on earth. It's in it. Once it's in it, so once this logic turns to this moment of unfolding, it stops functioning. The human being no longer is distracted by these outer, objective, mechanical ends or values. They're going to fall apart in terms of entertainment, first of all, and this means that they will mean nothing anymore. And when we become completely desensitized to all this entertainment, we will start flipping through it as well in recognition that it's utterly meaningless. So today, of course, we have these machines and we flip with a finger, and that's indicative of this. So we are completely indifferent to it at this point. Now what happens is that we're in the machine, we're indifferent to everything that is given to us. Now we turn upon ourselves. Now the age of selfies is just a manifestation of this. We have a hard time facing ourselves. We face ourselves through the machine. We ask the machine, tell us who we are. Please tell us. The machine gives you a snapshot. It says, I need more. And then you say, well, I have to change myself. Makeup. I don't even need to do that. The machine will change my makeup. And then people say, well, I need the surgeon to change my sex, change my gender, change my this, change my my species, turn me into a dolphin. So I'm seeking my identity. I don't know what the heck I am anymore. Because I don't no longer seek to project myself in something, and work and labor for that, which is objective. I'm already in the machine, so I don't need to labor. I'm right in the machine. I'm mechanically defined. Fine. Subjective element has been crushed, mediated by, it doesn't have to disappear altogether. It has to be mediated by the machine. I can no longer imagine, dream anything without the machine, without reference to the machine, without my dream being mediated by the images supplied by the machine. Right? So my imagination is completely techno-mediated. Right. So when this happens, well, at some point, I'm going to have to face myself. This is a problem because there's a void. I've already decided, or someone or something has already decided for me, that I have no identity aside from the data that is supplied mechanically. And so at this point, I face the vacuum, the void, the abyss. And that is unbearable. And that is where I become suicidal. So people will become suicidal. Massively. The machine will give them the instruments, of course, to commit suicide. So the machine now no longer serves the purpose of integrating men in the machine, because the machine is already their mecca, their home. Now the machine turns to this new business of helping people commit suicide, right? Because they can't face the void. So the only alternative at this point, since it's they're insensitive to the objective, it means nothing. It used to mean something because it was a dream that was at a distance from the subjective. The subjective now has been objectified. We're all reduced to data in the machine. So what happens now is that we seek the machine, the computer, to help us destroy ourselves. Now, the self-destruction of man here is really this consummation of the self-destruction of reason, which is the element of that constitutes the foundation of the technological empire. And that is autonomous reason, of course. Reason becomes autonomous and then projects itself into this empire, this new, brave new world, and as it finds itself entirely within it, its own creation, then it sees this creation as a means to destroy itself. Because then it just cannot bear its emptiness. Destruction becomes the final solution to the vision of the abyss, this absolute absurdity of life. What's the point of data in the face of nothingness, in the face of the abyss, the absence of being, this absence of being? Well, data is going to give us another Big Bang, right? Conflagration. Now, if we look at the story of Noah, in the story of Noah, God promises Noah, Genesis 8, I believe, God promises Noah that he will never again destroy, well, essentially all that is earthly, um, because of human corruption. People are, even in their youth, prone to evil. Right? We see this in Cain. Uh, this is the heritage of, well, that comes down through Adam, of course, Adam and Eve. So people are prone. Well, once there's Eve on the scene, she's vulnerable to the serpent, to cunning, and so they're, through their senses, you could say they're prone to evil. We're in a fallen world. However, the story of Noah essentially is telling us that God will not destroy the animals on behalf of the evil people. What does this really mean? And we could say that, that God's punishment, the deluge, right, this, covering up of all these animals, is a sign of divine necessity. There's a divine necessity that pertains to the evil of people. And in the story of Noah, you have the suggestion that once you have a contract with God, now it's not a contract in the modern sense, obviously, it's a poetic contract. So once you have an alliance, a bond, right, that, yes, can carry the weight of law, but it's fundamentally something of a deeper, more radical nature. So once you have this bond between the earth, all the animals, and God. So in other words, the animal life is for God. There's something that is coming out here in the story. Men no longer need to be concerned or worried about the earth being an obstacle to their well-being. Right? The earth will not be against man, for the simple reason that man is destined to God already, as the earth is used to give rise to man. So the earth is itself there for man. Of course, man is not there for himself. That's the whole point. So we have the earthly, or earth, that gives rise to plants, that give rise to animals, out of which emerges man as the king of the animals, and man, of course, is for God. And all of what is subhuman is in alliance with God through man. So we have nothing to worry about when it comes to the earthly, or the animal side of man. It is not because of the animal side of man that we would ever be destroyed. This, another way of putting it is that our common sense may be corrupt, but not fundamentally corrupt. So our senses, our imagination, can be fallen, but that doesn't mean that it's completely, irredeemably bad. There is light in the dark. So there's a thread of divine intelligence in all things. The story of Noah does not tell us, however, that under any circumstance will it be impossible. In fact, it doesn't tell us that it will be absolutely impossible for the human being to destroy himself as a species. It doesn't say that, because while our imagination is never entirely, our nature is not entirely corrupt, there is one thing that can be entirely corrupt and therefore can destroy itself entirely, and that is our reason. we can break our alliance with God. Reason can turn into a kind of cunning that defines itself absolutely autonomously of God. And when that happens, then by divine necessity, the reason implodes. And so self-destruction is the only outcome, the only ultimate possible outcome of the unfolding of, well, autonomous reason. And so freedom conceived as cut off entirely from conceiving itself. Right? Consciousness that cuts itself out and apart from divine perfection. So that is the situation we are faced with today. So we need not worry about the earth being against us. The earth is there for us. We need not worry about our imagination being too dangerous, and so we should not speculate about divine things. That's not a problem that is really dire. What we can worry about is our reasoning that cuts itself off from divine standards, natural, permanent standards, and then starts setting up mechanical standards that are a reflection of this autonomy of modern reason. Because that is the way to go when the ultimate goal is collective suicide. So, those who do not wish to join the party have only one way to go: recover a sense of permanence. There are permanent standards. Well, these permanent standards are not historically relative. They're not the standards that we can reconstruct scientifically, for example, by looking at a specific tradition and say, well, this is our culture, our civilization as opposed to others, our religion, our values, and so forth. It's not about ours as opposed to theirs. It's about a common nature. So a common communal end, the end of human being as such. That end, which involves ultimately is a perfection, is an excellence. Where is that excellence? We could also say that we become excellent as human beings as we pursue that end. So, in classical terms, we could say that we have a double end. Double end being human and divine. How is that? How does that work? Well, it's, to the extent that we pursue the divine end, that we turn to the divine end, that is our ultimate end, to be sure, that transcends all physical limitations. To the extent that we pursue it, that we turn to it, we exercise our own humanity, and therefore we become excellent or perfect as human beings, as some of the characters, indeed, of the Bible are said to be perfect.